Okay, well, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. We're glad to have you here. I'm Jamie Pasquinelli, ULI Pittsburgh District Manager. ULI Pittsburgh welcomes you to our first virtual Women's Leadership Initiative, A Conversation With program. I would like to give a special shout out to all of our sponsors. We thank you for your support in our efforts to produce impactful programming and initiatives. We couldn't do any of this without you, so thank you so much. ULI's mission to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities worldwide is even more critical as we respond to recent global events. As a charitable 501c3 nonprofit organization, we rely on our members and supporters to fulfill that mission. We thank you for all of your support and continued engagement as we tackle these challenges together. Just some housekeeping items. Please make sure to have your mics muted throughout the program to prevent any distractions to our speakers. Also, we will be engaging in a Q&A after the presentation. Please insert your question in the chat box at any time. We'll definitely get to your question. And if you would like to ask your question on video, we would welcome that as well. We wanted to do something a little different this time. We've been doing it the past couple of programs that we've had, and we're all missing that sort of networking component of programming. So we invite you to stay on and network with each other and chat and catch up. The program will be recorded today and available on ULI's Knowledge Finder. You can visit Knowledge Finder at knowledge.uli.org. I will now hand over the program to Dusty Kirk, partner at Reed Smith, and our amazing WLI chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you to all of our sponsors. And thank you for everyone being here today. What a great group we have. So I think this is going to be an exciting program just because we have such an exciting person to speak to us today. Mary-Beth McGrew, a Pittsburgh native, an architect. She's worked all over our country, and we are blessed to have her here at Pitt. But she has such an interesting background. I'm not going to go over all of her things that she's done over her life. I'm going to let us have this conversation because you'll get a sense of what a benefit she is to our community and how great it is to have her here at Pitt. So Mary-Beth, welcome. Beth.
Hello.
Hi, great to see you.
Thank
and
you.
With your fall colors behind you.
The day needs some color, don't you think?
Yes. So Beth, you're the Associate Vice Chancellor for Planning, Design, and Real Estate at the University of Pittsburgh. And I think this is a wonderful position for you. We are so lucky to have you in Pittsburgh, but it really wasn't one you wanted, right?
Well, it wasn't one I had in mind. That's for sure.
So tell us how you first came to Pittsburgh. What was your connection?
Well, one day I got a call from someone about giving them a tour, a group of people from the University of Pittsburgh, a tour. Of course, I thought that would be fun since it was my alma mater and I hadn't been back in a long, long time. So I gave them a tour, and then I got a call to come for a day and consult. And then I got another call to come back, and eventually all those calls led to, all right, let's consider a move.
So you were at the University of Cincinnati at that time.
I was at the University of Cincinnati at that time and had been there for a while.
But you grew up in this area, or for part of your growing up?
I did. I grew up in this area, and I also got a couple of degrees from the University of Pittsburgh, which is in part the motivation to give something back, if I could, to the university.
So tell us about those degrees, because I think it shows the breadth of your knowledge and what you bring to the university.
Oh, well, they were probably unexpected for most people in the field, but my first degree was in biology and speech and hearing science. My second degree was in speech and language pathology. And then later on, I went to a different university to get a degree in architecture.
And where did you go for that degree in
I went
architecture?
to Miami University
In Ohio?
hmm
Okay. And so that's how you ended up in Cincinnati.
Well, I actually went there for work, and my specialty was working with cerebral palsy children, most of whom were nonverbal. So I made toys for them to show insurance companies or even to help parents understand that there are many proto-linguistic intents that show that you have the capacity for language long before words are uttered. So on a whim one day, I applied to the PhD program in anatomy and physiology. And on a whim, I took my shopping bag of drawings and toys to design art and architecture planning at the University of Cincinnati, where I did a year there while I kept my private practice, and then moved on to a graduate program when I thought I really could make this leap. But I kept my license as a therapist for a couple of years, just to be sure.
So you were actually designing toys.
Yeah, they were modest toys, but they were toys that were important if you were 18 months or so.
And but it was that design and that designing things that you liked that led you
Yes.
to architecture. So what was the connection, and how did you feel after you got into the architecture field?
Well, I certainly liked the design. Industrial design was a little too specific for my taste. Architecture seemed just right. And ironically, a couple of the books that I was assigned the first semester were ones I had already read in speech pathology. So things aren't that different. I think one was like The Hidden Dimension and the Poetics of Space. And anyway, there were those connections in communication. But when I first got there, admittedly, it was a brand new field. I didn't know my 2B pencil from my H pencil and all of those things. People were still using pens and ink at that time. So it was a big switch. And I had moments of hesitation, but I had a few tenured friends who encouraged me, and I met with a few successes, so I finished.
So how do you think that connection, that speech connection and architecture, how do you think that has benefited you in your career?
It has benefited me a lot. When I first started, I did what most people do. I produced everyone's drawings. But soon I found that I could work with clients maybe a little differently than a brand new architect typically does or get exposed to. I had a couple of my own clients to bring to the firm, but I think that comfort with talking to people, particularly in difficult situations, was a great benefit in architecture. It certainly wasn't the same as talent in design, and I don't want to minimize that, but working with clients, it was a great help.
And so Beth, I think you said they were using pen and ink and pencil. So how many women were in your architecture school at that time?
It was just starting to be, because I went back as my second career. There were a few. The firm I went to had one, but that changed quickly over the years. And I can't say that was necessarily a bad thing. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it because I had so much work to learn how to do. That wasn't really at the forefront, but it was nice to have someone else there. And I had actually met her in school. So that was
so this other woman had been in school with you.
Yeah, she was a year ahead of me, and she was also changing careers. And so we met in an evening calculus class. For some reason, we both thought we needed calculus to do architecture. And I don't know if it helped or not, but we slugged through that. And when I graduated, she let me know that there was an opening there. And so we ended up working together, which was great fun.
That is great. Now, people often ask about mentors. So it sounds like she was a friend, but a mentor to you in some aspects.
She was. She was a good friend of mine, and it helped just to have her there. And I did have mentors in the firm along the way. There was a planner who was had done a lot of campus planning, and he helped me a lot move into campus planning.
And see, I think that's important because I think you can find mentors anywhere. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a woman. It doesn't even have to be in the same field as you're in. So, so I just wondered, you know, to hear a little bit about your experience with that.
Yes, he was a character, and different from a lot of the folks in the firm. But one day he pulled me away from my drafting table and suggested that perhaps my talents would be better in planning, in campus planning. And off we went to Alabama to do the University of Alabama campus plan, which was new. You know, it's different seeing at a quarter scale and an eighth scale, and then suddenly seeing at a 32nd scale, and I gave up with the 200th scale. That was not my cup of tea. But at the 30th and 40th scale, I remember one day when I could actually see that, because it's a different thing, looking at a detail and looking at a larger plan.
So the University of Alabama bears your mark and this plan and your mentor. So how long did it take? How long were you there, and what did you do?
Well, we had the fine experience of going there in the dead of summer. So I think it was 103 degrees. One doesn't forget that. And it was a big campus of some 400 acres, and it's quite pretty in different ways. I had not seen streets tree-lined with thick layers of kudzu. That was a first. And so it was a very different kind of geography. Luckily, in the firm I worked for, we had a lot of environmental scientists. So I could call back to the office and get a lot of conversation about the nature of the land there and the nature of the landscape and what to expect. And that helped a lot to lay out buildings and what might be the next plan. So it was a lot of fun. A little bit scary, I will admit, presenting to their board of trustees and not having that as a big background.
So what advice do you give to young women who are faced with that first time where they don't have a deep background, but they're going to have to present themselves to whomever?
I feel like a lot of young people I'm around are very confident, and that's nice. I was not raised that way, nor was that my experience as a therapist. It's just a very different kind of parts of your personality that get developed. But I do think listening to the people around you and finding those people who are willing to open doors for you. I was grateful, and it influenced my career for a long time to have worked with those environmental scientists that allowed me to open doors to working on interpretive centers or nature centers, because I had such a strong body of knowledge in the firm. There were a lot of engineers in the firm as well who had deep understanding of infrastructure, which I didn't have. So all of those things, I guess maybe the greatest appreciation I developed was, while eventually I longed for a pure architecture firm, I will admit that, to get some of those high designers, I will not trade that first experience of having all those different disciplines and all those different experiences to influence how I would learn to think about the built world, which is not a simple place. So I'm great.
No, it really isn't a simple place. And it must have really affected how you approached all the problems that you encountered on these various campuses that you worked on.
It certainly kept me humble. You know, there's always a lot you realize that you don't really know, no matter how many years of practice.
And so now, when did you first come to Pitt? And you said you had your undergraduate degree here.
Mm-hmm.
And so where did you grow up?
I grew up in Clairton, Pennsylvania, which wasn't quite as in sad shape as it is today. It was a much more vibrant community then, but it was still a little bit of a rough area, and it was a steel town. And at the time, the University of Pittsburgh had scholarships for students. So that was a nice opportunity to get a door opened.
So yeah, well, I grew up in a mill town, and I dare to say I bet a lot of people on this Zoom call. Grew up in a mill town here, so it's a great way that, you know, we share that in Pittsburgh. I think it's made us who we are. So at Pitt, you've brought those Pittsburgh roots to Pitt, but I'm sure it's changed a lot since you were
It
a
has.
student. And so what are you seeing as the challenges besides COVID? We all have that, but what are you seeing as the challenges that Pitt's facing? You know, it's really in sort of a landlocked community.
It is. It is. I think in part, one of the reasons why they recruited me was to look at their campus and their plan. Even though it is a landlocked area, there are still opportunities. Granted, COVID put a little bit of a delay on some of those things happening, but the hillsides of Pittsburgh are pretty interesting. And so I found a landscape architect and a biologist to help me look at the hillsides and think about if we were going to build on them, how do we use the landscaping to stabilize the hillside rather than doing plantings by single trees, or the way that the city permits by individual building, to maybe look at the hillside as a whole. And so we could use that landscape to stabilize the hillside because it has a lot of old mines in it. And right now, I think it has a lot of invasive species that keep it stable, like the knotweed, which is not good for the environment. So taking a look at that and seeing what opportunities we had on the hillside to build. I don't know if we'll end up building there, but we certainly have mapped out the hillside to be a place of interest and perhaps a place of delight, rather than the little skinny stairways that take you all the way up to the athletic area. So that's one thing I've been working on. And the university, the perception is by many people, if you have to walk a bit, that it's too far. And I think helping people realize that in an urban area, that's what it's going to be. You've got to spread out just a little bit. But then the alternative to that is realizing that the energy of the university needs to be in part the energy of the city and the neighborhood. So I've spent a lot of time in the neighborhood trying to make our relationship with them a little more shared goals rather than antagonistic goals, in order to be sensitive to where we might think about being and what areas they feel might be invasive into the culture of the area. So that's a bit of a challenge, but it's also an opportunity.
So I think that what you're speaking about is the homes that are part of our Oakland neighborhood and the university and all the health centers and hospitals, and how do they all meld? And so how have you been approaching that?
Well, one was to find out some of the benefits, and some things that the university has done long before I got there was allowing everyone to have a bus pass that took them anywhere in the city for free. I think that probably cut down the number of cars coming into Oakland. There are not many people at all. I just finished looking at that who live in Oakland, who work at the university or at UPMC. So maybe as we think the city's working on a plan for Oakland, just like we have in our campus plans, some parts and pieces of it that affect the neighborhood, but looking at what we might have as shared goals and how we might take a look at everything from the transportation to the bicycles to what's coming soon, the scooters, and how we can shape a neighborhood and what kind of amenities might attract people in addition to students to become a part of the neighborhood. It's my belief, and I think the literature shows that a mixed neighborhood is a stronger neighborhood than just all one thing.
So what you're saying, even though there's all these hospitals and the university, is that there really aren't a lot of employees of either of those that are living in Oakland.
No, there are thousands of people who get into the city or into that part of the city every day. But when we did the numbers, there are fewer than 300 who actually reside there.
Oh, wow. That is not what I would have expected.
Yeah, it was a little startling, but it's good information from which to begin to plan.
And so how do you think the university will work with the city on that kind of a plan?
Well, we meet regularly with the Oakland Neighborhood Planning and Development Corporation, and we're a large part of the plan. We're on both the action teams and the steering committee for the city's plan for Oakland. And I hope that together we can work on, where is density a good thing and where is density not such a good thing? How do you reinvent Oakland and take away some of the tiredness of that central Oakland neighborhood, and I think really looking at what amenities make it a place that would attract people who are working in addition to those who are going to school.
So do you think that the community from all the meetings would be open to condos or townhouses, or that would not just be for students? They would be for, as you're saying, the working.
Well, the first thing was to look at the statistics. So we looked at the households and the nature of the households and how many were owner occupied and how many were not. And that was baseline data. And then we're working with a developer who is now doing a housing study to see what kind of housing might the neighborhood enjoy and what kind of housing might people be interested in. So we're anxious to see what those results might be, because that's something that the neighbors who are still there talk about all the time, that while they don't dislike the students, they'd like to have something more than, or in addition to students in the neighborhood. And we, of course, would like to have our graduate students and employees some live there as well.
It would certainly enrich the Oakland community.
I think so. And it might bring some things that draw people there at the end of the workday.
Right, that's right. Maybe more restaurants and and bars that aren't just student bars.
Right.
Restaurants, right. So you said, I think, that COVID has really put a little bit of a backtracking on some of the plans of the university. How has that been affected, and how are you looking holistically now differently, or?
Well, it's important to reconsider the plan, and the institution has been healthy in maintaining their budget and also maintaining the employees. While they did offer some early retirements, there haven't been layoffs or furloughs, and so they did not contribute to the unemployment of the region, and I think that was good. Because of that, I think it's not so much that we would throw the plan out and start over, but maybe reconsider the speed with which we develop certain things to make sure that we have enough institutional bench strength to weather this, since we don't know when it'll end. And also we want to make sure we have to do different things, I believe, to keep the students happy and to keep the faculty feeling comfortable coming into work, and the staff for that matter. Most of us have been working from home, although facilities and my group, Planning, Design, Real Estate, have come in quite a bit to get things ready and mapped out as we held some hybrid learning on campus. But it's not the same place, so I think a lot of the planning work that's been done is good work, but I think making sure that those are the right moves and that we don't want to reconsider things. One of the things I'd like to ask some of the organizations out there and especially the university architects, is, are any of them rethinking their housing moving forward? Are they changing what they see as the basic unit? Our literature is kind of interesting. In what I've collected from housing so far, it seems that the incidence of COVID was not greater. In fact, it was less in students who shared spaces. Some of that is, I guess, we learned that even though the old gang bathrooms and double-loaded corridors have gone out of fashion, they did breed strong friendships. And we've seen So that might be maybe why the students who share a space can socialize together, and maybe they don't need to go out as much as others. So I think before we jump to any rash conclusions, it would be good to get some data and to look at other places and to share that data to see how do we move forward. And that's what I mean about looking. We have a plan for some hillside housing. I think it's a lovely plan done by some very talented people. But it's good to take a look at what are our numbers showing us, and to have a couple of semesters of that before we just fly back into restarting all of those projects.
Right. Have you seen a number of students opting to just go to class and live at home?
The last I looked, and that's not my area, but I do collect that data moving forward, there were not that many of them. We'll see how the second semester is. Because if the students, and that's why we opened up a lot of the classrooms, that even if your professor wasn't there, you could still have the class in the classroom. And we still opened all of the buildings by mid-semester so that students could have places to study and in different ways become a part of campus.
Well, I think that's so interesting because people, young people need to be part of the community where they're going to college. That's just part of it.
Oh yeah, it's part of the experience. And I think the data is showing that even though they're very, very savvy with technology, that all of them prefer the in-person experience. I can't remember who did that study. Maybe it was from Gensler, I'm not sure, but I remember reading it. And I think those things are good. Well, don't we need, I mean, I miss meeting with people. I'm certainly tired of my computer. Would much rather meet all these people in person and socialize with them. Even though this is the second best, it's still nicer to meet in person.
No, absolutely. And, in the past, we would have had a whole group in a room and had some glasses of wine and some food. And
Yes.
so, we all miss that, I think. So, but maybe one day we'll have to have you back and make sure that you can meet us in person.
Yes, that would be very nice.
So I wanted to ask then a little bit about how do you think, you're studying all these things, how are decisions going to be made going forward? And I'm glad to hear you're working with Oakland OPDC, Oakland Planning and Development, who's been such a force in the community. So how do you think the decisions will be made going forward?
You mean in the community or campus?
Yeah, between Pitt and the community, and I know the master plan that's being developed.
Yeah, well, with the local community, with OPDC and their leader, we meet monthly, and we started talking about what the neighborhood wanted, and so we're looking to create some shared goals. And to the extent that the university can participate in those, I think that's a positive thing. I work closely with our government relations group. And I think that the goal is to have a better relationship with the community and to look at what we might do together. So Wanda, who's the head of OPDC, we just talked last week about what kinds of things we'd like to do. And we talked about using her meetings to begin to develop a vocabulary of what Oakland could become and what kind of steps would it take to become that. And then if we have some things that are pretty interesting, we can share those with the city planner who's working on the Oakland plan. But I think it's important to address both the neighborhood at the smaller scale and then the larger scale through the city planning process.
So you mentioned the local governments, and so I just wanted to explore, when you were at Cincinnati, how, and I know that Cincinnati, has often been compared to Pittsburgh and the rivers and its approach. And I was wondering how you worked with the city government there and how what you learned there you might bring to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, well, I will admit that was one of my challenges when I got here. It's a very there were a lot of interactions with the city here and I had a very different set of interactions in Cincinnati. Maybe it was in part that the state, most of our work went through the state, although if it affected the city or was on the edge of campus, we always shared that work with the city. But there are a lot of layers in the city and a lot of our work that still goes through the city here. So I've been learning, and the city has been very friendly, but how to navigate our projects through the city. And it's complicated. There are more layers in Pittsburgh. So while the cities are similar, having grown up here, certainly the geography here is dramatic with the three rivers. The culture, I still see a difference. And maybe that's because I had such a thick culture growing up here. It's just what I remember. So it's not better or worse, it's just different. And so the engagements happen on in a very different way. And the neighborhood groups, there are many more, I don't want to say layers because that sounds like might be negative. There are just many more avenues to cover before we do things in the city of Pittsburgh. And that's okay.
Well, I think many of us feel that way, who work in that work with the city. And, there are a lot of layers because some things go through the county, some things go through the city, some have to go through all three, the city, county, and the school, if you're looking for economic incentives or any, and it's just not one-stop shopping, as I know some other places are. So we do have a question in the chat that I want to ask now, and it came from Lynn DiLorenzo, and she's saying that Bates Street remains a main entry into Oakland and the campus. So how do you think that Bates Street will be better utilized?
Well, isn't that a great question, Lynn? I have to laugh because when I sort of forgot all my way around, but when I came up Bates Street for the first time, I noticed that piece of the hillside that was always falling off, I think they had red tape there, but the yellow caution tape and the protective barrier was still there. So I'm guessing it continues to still fall away every season after the freeze-thaw cycle. So while it is a major connection, it is still, I think, a very difficult connection. It's a narrow street. It puts a lot of traffic through the neighborhood. It's a nice direct connection, but I think we need to look at how that could work a little better. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about Bates Street. But some things don't change, and that did not.
Well, and I always wondered, with everything being so undermined in our cities many, 100 years ago or more, if that is part of our challenge with Bates Streets and some of our other hillsides. So it seems like that is a major work project that probably will involve the state, as well as, the city and, the Southwest Planning Commission putting it on its plan. So,
I don't think it's an easy fix. I don't think it's an easy thing that we should just do this. I think it's a pretty complicated fix.
So that being the case, I think the question is how do you get that fix going? Because I know that so many people on this Zoom call are interested in that.
Well, I'm not sure I have all the answers to that, but one day wandering around, noticing what had changed, sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't rebuild all those stairs, many of which are still there from the row houses that went down to the Jones and Laughlin mill, all those steps. I can't imagine people doing that every day down and up. I'm sure they were in shape having done that, but sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't rebuild those and have a more direct route down the hillside on foot. I know I sat in on the meeting for the one Oakland Connect or whatever they were calling it, that was not well received by the neighborhood. And so I think there's a lot more work to be done to see how neighborhoods so close can support each other, and what benefits there are, if any, for the neighborhood. I think those have to be articulated to get some support. But I think we're going to have to all work together. And I think the meeting that I attended, it had to be a tough meeting for all those who had put a lot of time into figuring out a plan. Nonetheless, I think people had a lot of important things to say that are all going to have to go into making a solution. So I read a great article in Shelter Force the other day, and it was about maybe not so much getting to consensus, but putting together the data that helps may allow things move forward. It was quite a thoughtful article because consensus doesn't always allow you to move forward with the best solution, but being respectful of people as opinions and building a scenario that works for people it was just a very different strategy on how to do a community meeting. And I thought the time was just right for the world's complex problems, where it's going to be hard to get everyone to agree, but it's important to really listen to everyone and sort through what everyone's issues are. And probably Bates Street and how you get from down in the Hollow up to Oakland. I think those are going to be big discussions in the near term.
So perhaps if you send to Jamie that article, that would be a great thing that we could send around to the attendees on this call. That would be fun. So we have another question from Greg Bruges. Does Pitt have any ideas on additional parking garages, or would they rather not provide more parking to encourage public transit and bicycles?
Yeah, well, the goal is, and it comes from the city, they would like us to have no new parking. The neighbors always worry when we build anything that if it increases enrollment, that will need to address new parking. So I think the bus passes that afford the faculty, staff, and students free transportation, I myself took advantage of that and thought it was great before COVID, and I'm about to venture on them again. But I think continuing to support public transportation is going to be a big part of the University of Pittsburgh, and certainly maintaining the status of the parking that we have, even though we might have to demolish a garage and do some others because we have some buildings in need of repair or demolition. But I think the focus is always going to be on public transportation.
So I think public transportation is so important for the city, and I know that that's something that Lindy Lorenzo was referencing, and to get people to Hazelwood and the Technology Center. And I know they've been studying transit and bus rapid transit through Pitt and to the airport for some time, and we've all been waiting for it to happen. And do you have any additional information? I know it's going to go right through your campus.
Right. There's a couple of spots where it will affect, it crosses into our property line as well, like in front of the Barco Law School, where we have to rethink some things, how our trees are planted. We're also looking at, we want to do another shuttle study. And these things happened in Cincinnati, where every now and then, you note that the Children's Hospital bus follows the Pitt bus. It also followed the UC bus. And so it's hard to do those shared shuttles, but I think those studies are good because every year we did them in Cincinnati, I noticed we got a little bit closer to determining what hours of the day we might share a shuttle. So one of the things we wanted to do, Pitt wanted to do for the city plan through Dara is in the city, is to look at, to give her all of our data that we had collected and also do the study on the shuttles from other institutions. And it's a complicated scenario because some neighbors would like to be able to get on the shuttle and use it for transportation. And other neighbors do not want the pitch shuttles in their neighborhood. So there's another one of those complex urban problems, but I don't think that they can't be solved by working together and sharing data and continuing to do the studies of how this neighborhood could be both sustained and transformed a bit.
So do you think there would be coordination between the UPMC shuttles, the pitch shuttles? Carnegie Mellon has a shuttle.
Yeah, well, that's some of the data that our parking and transportation folks have done. And we have a proposal out there that we're hoping to get funded to, again, look at those shuttles. So we've done the study before and nothing too much changed as a result of that, but it's a good thing to keep updating to look at, are they really efficiently moving people around, and how do they affect the neighborhoods, and is there any opportunity for sharing?
So I just want to change gears a little bit and talk about, get back to the earliest part of your career. And I think some of our young people are saying, what would be the best advice that you would give to someone starting out in a career like yours?
I don't know if I know the best advice, but I can tell you one thing. I did what was afforded to me, the opportunity to go to school and a revenue stream to get there. I wouldn't trade that for anything, but the opportunity to change and not being afraid to change and do what I thought I really wanted to do, which wasn't afforded to me when I first started school. I think that it was scary for a few years to deprive myself of income by changing careers, but it was also, I can't tell you how much it was worth doing. So if you're one, I don't think you have to go into something and think I have to do that for the rest of my life. I mean, you could do that, but if you're somebody like me who found that there was something more important to you to do, not to be afraid to change and to embrace that and to seek out some supports to help you get there. Because I think I don't know, I feel very thankful that I've had such a rich life.
So that was actually one of the questions that was submitted to us by Manuel Gomez, saying, so what tips would you give to reinvent yourself, given your experiences? And you touched on it a little bit, but any other tips?
Well, yeah, one tip is to get some support and not be too afraid. Another one was to do well in what you're doing. If I had not embraced what I went to school for the first time with such exuberance, I would not have had the opportunity to write a grant that the little rural county I was working in let me have parents come in and actually teach them how to solder and make these silly little battery operated toys that were delightful to show students how to speak. So I think just embracing wherever you are leads you to the path where you ought to be.
Oh, I think that is great advice. I like that word exuberance too. I think we need that. It's a little hard right now in our COVID world, but I think that's a great word and a great feeling in how you approach the world. And obviously you've done that. So what is the worst advice that you were given when you were starting out? Something that you would say, don't fall into this trap.
Oh, I can tell you that one because I remember going to my first structures class in graduate school. You had to take steel, concrete, and wood. And I remember someone's commenting on the fact that, oh, no, Cincinnati had a big architecture school and that filtered up to Miami as well. But I remember someone saying, just being cynical about the number of architects and the need for them. And it did cause me to pause, but it didn't make me stop. And I'm glad I didn't. So sometimes people can rain on your parade and you have to think, yeah, sometimes advice is good and you need to put it on and listen and change the way you're doing something. And sometimes you need to hear it and then perhaps put it on a shelf.
And I think that is really true, because I think that had many of us women listened to some of that advice, we wouldn't be in the careers that we're
Yeah.
in.
Well, my own mother was that way. She was sweet as sweet can be, a fourth grade school teacher until the day she died. That's just who she was. She thought I was out of my mind, giving up a really good career to go do something that she didn't consider particularly feminine. It sounds funny now, but that is the way she thought about it.
So that's so interesting, because we're all, this group, this Women's Leadership Initiative, is all about getting more women involved in the real estate environment, no matter what it is, environmental, broker, engineer. And so what do you think, we've seen a lot of progress for women, but what is your hope that you will see in real estate and higher ed? What is your hope that you will see for women?
Yeah, it seems that in the field of architecture, those doors are opening. I'm sure people still find weird things, but to some extent, there are more of us out there, right, Marcy? I see Marcy in there. So I think we'll see more of that. I do think it's helpful to have, you talked about mentors, and I remember when I went to my first structures class, I remember sort of freezing, that I was so overwhelmed by having been a therapist and then suddenly doing these very technical things. And I remember learning from someone who was not an architect or a structural engineer, but who knew math very well, and teaching me how to do problems inside and outside, and make perhaps not the way I was taught to do them in the class, but to think about them more nimbly, and that was through math. And I mention that as an example, because if we don't do that in the schools, and we don't help fragile people feel that they have an opportunity to succeed, and I guess that starts way younger than the university, but it still exists in the university. It's easy to be intimidated. And so having the exposure and having people who can help guide you a little bit is still really important. And I think that
it's important to see
doors to women.
It's important to see women like you in these roles. So there's a question: how do you gain your confidence when growing through your career? Was it primarily through mentors and the support? You just talked a little bit about that. But
oh, I was a Catholic Milltown girl from an Italian. I know I don't look it, but everyone in my family did, from an Italian family. So confidence in sewing, confidence in putting out a spread of food like nobody's business. There I was confident in entering different worlds. I'm not sure that I don't know that I ever wake up confident. The only thing I have ever learned to do is roll up my sleeves and work, and not expect that glory lands on me in a day. That and I do see that in students. We weren't accustomed to being praised very much growing up, even though we were well loved and cared for. It just wasn't what people did. So I think toughening up a little bit and knowing that confidence maybe isn't the goal at all, but feeling okay about yourself and your process of learning and doing something, and taking your time to be respectful of those and learn things from those around you is really important. The word confidence, I don't know. I just never woke up feeling confident, but I don't wake up feeling overly bad. I just don't wake up I feel like I have energy to take on lots of things. But confidence is not a word that was in front of me many days.
so do you think that that's a difference between women and men? So just just in
But
general,
it might
perhaps.
have been in the past when maybe there were eras when men maybe had the wind at their back, but I don't think that's it today. And I think the world is a very complex place. So it's probably very different in some international cultures. But I do worry about the young men in our country, in the US particularly today. I think they're expected to do a lot. I'm not sure that they're heard. So I think it's a funny world. I think there are still closed doors for women that we need to open and help them get there. But I think we should not lose sight of the young men in our society growing up. And now we're seeing more women going to college than men. I think we see a lot of angry men, maybe those who might have lost some of the skills that they had using their hands. So I think it's a very complex thing, and I like not to draw the line in the sand so much, but I think we need to. I think we need to support all of our young people.
That is so true. That is, I think that's wisdom. So, anyone else have any questions now for Beth? If you do, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat. Otherwise, I know we have more things that we can talk about. So one of the things that we talked about, and I think it's interesting because you do have a family, and you brought your family here to Pittsburgh, or at least your husband.
Mhm.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that, how you all, with 2 careers, raised a family and survived it all?
I can't say we were always gracious, but in doing that, and it wasn't always smooth sailing. But partway into my world of architecture, with 2 children, we decided that we were both on the road a lot, and we had maps on the refrigerator, and it was getting increasingly complicated. And I'm a big believer in daycare when the kids are young, but once they hit 11 and they aren't in daycare anymore, those are the tough times, and I think they need their parents more. At least my 2 did. So we made some sacrifices. My husband started a business at home that he evolved into a little brownfield business. It wasn't the same as his technical business, so we made some sacrifices financially, but it was well worth it. So that he was there after school, he was there to be there for the kids. And that was a big switch for both of us to adjust to, but we did it. And neither of us today are sorry that we did that.
So what was his job before he started his own brownfields business?
He worked for Honeywell. He was an industrial, I always think of it as algebra word problems kind of engineer. How much stuff does this vat dump into that vat to make these things? So he knew Mr. Rogers would have liked him because he knew how all things worked in the factories and did all those controls. So that was a big switch for him to give up his manager's job and start this little company that he did, which was a curious little company, but it afforded him some work. It was technical, and it allowed him to be more flexible to be at home.
So I think that's really great. It shows the great support that he was willing to give to the family and to you. Yes.
And we lightened up a lot. And we could also, we would always buy the worst house in a nice neighborhood. And then we lived in construction most of the time. So I think my daughter was the only one who could get through shop with a straight A. She couldn't sew, but she could pound and build something. So, those are sacrifices that people make. Not everybody has to do that, but for us, we did. And my husband's business was a shoelace factory. He just shut it down when we moved to Pittsburgh, but it was a funny little thing. But he built all those machines, rebuilt them all, and sold shoelaces and lanyards to teams and to clothing companies, and my son worked there for a little while. My daughter did not find that appealing, so she did not work there, but it was kind of an interesting thing.
So that is fascinating in and of itself, from Honeywell to shoelaces. So
Yes, we had a lot of bad shoelace jokes. We would have one for every family reunion.
like
So
living on a shoestring, or
yes, living on a shoestring, and we just had all kinds of them that were fun. But it was a big sacrifice he made, I know, but it worked for us. And I was too new an architect to want to pause. And so that was good. And it gave our kids another model of how to put a family together.
And so you said that he closed his business and came to Pittsburgh. Did he have any ties to Pittsburgh before coming here?
No, he was born and raised in Cincinnati and had never left. So it was a big deal. I lured him here with all the good jazz in Pittsburgh. He knows a lot about jazz and loves jazz. So we were having a great time until COVID. It's such fun. But there is
Oh, I know.
little neighborhood, the Con Elma, a lot of the jazz places. We went down to the river where they had this. Did any of you do that? That they had the stage and some jazz musicians play, and then you couldn't clap, but you could honk your horn, and that was a lot. So we heard some of that, and there's a couple of places who are now playing outdoors, and so you could take your chair and order food or drinks if you wanted to, but you could just hear it. And so that's been a lot of fun for him.
Well, that's great.
And he's a
Sounds
good
like
sport.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun for you too. So
I saw something pop up there. What was that? Behind every good woman is a man. There's a new twist on the phrase.
that is right. Thank you, Manuel. And vice versa too.
I will tell you, I also had the support of a great mother-in-law. I used to joke with Joe that if we ever got divorced, I get to keep the in-laws. But I had an extremely supportive mother-in-law who was a counselor in the schools, and she was just totally supportive of all the changes, all the changes that we made, the work that I did, the amount of traveling I had to do, and that was really nice.
That's great. So that's another important lesson. Wherever you can find that support, to find it. So how do you think things have changed? You talked a little bit about coming back to Pittsburgh, and it wasn't, except for the Bate Street entrance, looking the same. How do you think Pittsburgh has changed?
Well, we were going to move the factory here, and we couldn't find a small industrial site. So that was startling in a city that was loaded with small industries. And that was a little bit sad because that was a lot of the culture here. I think it's starting to build up, and maybe it's coming back in the form of maker spaces and spin-offs to restart some small businesses. But none of the communities wanted anything that was zoned in industrial. And so that was really sad for us, which is why he shut down the business. So I've seen that. I think the buildings have changed. I had not been here much, so I hadn't seen that the steel mills were gone. I know that the smoke and things were tough, but still it was a heavy duty part of what made the city, and not seeing that was different. I think the university has grown into its powerhouse of a research institution. I guess it always had those beginnings, but it wasn't quite as strong as it is now. So that was nice to see that it's matured to be such an institutionally sound research place, and that's good. The neighborhoods are still the neighborhoods. The houses are close. The housing types vary. People are on the streets a lot. I think that's particularly wonderful. Of course, I haven't ventured out to the suburbs because I didn't grow up in the suburbs, and I've never much lived in the suburbs, but I've seen that change. And I've been, as I listen to the news and things, at first I thought that the language, the speech patterns of Pittsburgh had gone away, but every now and then I still hear them. And that's fun.
Yeah, you can't take the Yinzers out of the Berg,
Right,
really.
right.
It's okay. We're all there. So where do you live?
Resilient, and that makes a difference. I mean, that resiliency is still here, and I see that. That's a strong thing. So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, absolutely. We are resilient. We are a resilient place. And I think I was going to say that Pitt has really become a draw from outside of the region.
Mm-hmm.
And so it used to be, pretty much a Western Pennsylvania school, but it's not true any longer. And I think
It's
it
not.
brings different challenges to the university. So,
I mean, Oakland, if you look at the data, Oakland is really a little international community.
and that is great. I've heard from some of the real estate apartments that owners that they miss those international students who are not able to come here right now because of COVID. So, and I think that affects the restaurants that are in Oakland
Oh, it does.
and everything else. So,
And it affects the laboratories. We had a very strong international population in a lot of our labs.
in your research,
Mhm.
right? Oh, that's right. So that's a big gap that I'm sure the university is looking to fill as soon as they can.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that having housing in Oakland for some of those researchers and things would be a draw?
I
Not
do.
just for students, but
I think a walk to work program is a good program for all of us. I mean, I know I would take the bus in and walk my 2 miles home every day, and that kept me moving, and it's a good way to forget the day, to be outside, and I felt pretty safe. And I think being able to walk, at least having the choice to get somewhere and not spend your day on the road commuting, is something that we want to afford people. And I also think it makes a better community. Not only do we want diversity in our nationalities, we also want diversity in our age groups.
absolutely. Well, I want to thank you, Beth. I want to thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. This has been exciting and wonderful. And one day we'll have you when we can all get together and meet in person and have a glass of wine. So Jamie, are you ready for the networking?
I just wanted to wrap this up really quickly, Dusty. If you could all see my screen, we have some upcoming programs, but you could always check out our events on our website. Follow us on social media for up-to-date information. And we have some really great events coming up that are listed here. But one in particular is the Built by Women Redefining Our Professional Landscape on 11/19. And I'll let Dusty talk about that a little bit before we say goodbye.
Yes, so this is a really important initiative of our Women's Leadership Initiative with AIA. And it is open to all members from AIA and WLI and ULI to brainstorm about how we could redefine the professional landscape and what would our built environment look like if it was built and designed by women. So I just really want to call that to your attention. And it is going to be a series. That's going to be the first event in the series. And then we hope to next spring to have a much bigger, and maybe it'll go into summer, but depending on whether we can meet in person, but it would be a symposium on, bringing in planners and the government officials and talk about how we could really change our region and our communities by including, just as Beth was talking about a few minutes ago, diverse people in how they look at design and, and not just design, but how it could affect the community in which you live, maybe walkable and other things like that. So that's our little push for 11/19. I hope you can join us, and Jamie has the other events listed too.
Yeah, so if you want to register for that event, it's a AIA Pittsburgh, ULI Pittsburgh members only event. So if you're not a member yet, please become a member so you can attend this. And if you would like to register, please email me at Jamie. Well, I'll put my email address in the chat because it's my last name's a little bit hard to spell, but it's actually on my screen as well. So email me for more information. And thank you so much, Mary-Beth, and thank you, Dusty, for an amazing program. And if anybody wants to stay and chat, please, we welcome you to just stay on this Zoom call. And if you're calling it a day, have a fabulous Thursday and a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.